Hello everyone. In our last audiopod, we discussed something serious, which was about being flexible, accepting change around us. If we do not accept the change around us, we can become extinct. That means we will perish. Just because we didn't want to change ourselves and accept the situation, we didn't get accustomed to the situation or our surroundings. And it wasn't harmful for others but for ourselves. Let's find out what happened next. How was Haw's new journey and how did Hem reacted further? Haw started his journey. He stuck his head out into the maze and peered anxiously. He thought about how he'd gotten himself into this cheeseless situation. He had believed that there may not be any cheese in the maze, or he may not find it. Such fearful beliefs were immobilizing and killing him. Haw smiled. He knew Hem was wondering who moved my cheese, but Haw was wondering why didn't I get up and move with the cheese sooner? As he started out into the maze, Haw looked back to where he had come from and felt its comfort. He could feel himself being drawn back into familiar territory, even though he hadn't found cheese here for some time. Haw became more anxious and wondered if he really wanted to go out into the maze. He wrote a saying on the wall ahead of him and stared at it for some time. What would you do if you weren't afraid? What would you do if you weren't afraid? So guys, again, take out a moment from your time, from your schedule, sit back and think, what would you do? Whenever we think of taking into any decision, we are into a fear state. We fear of taking a decision, we fear of the outcome. But just think about it, like what would you do if you weren't afraid? And whatever your mind says, just go ahead and do it. Just conquer your fear. And then you'll realize what were the things you just left and you were stuck into the fear of not doing it. Likewise, Haw thought about it. He knew sometimes some fear can be good. When you are afraid, things are going to get worse. If you do not do something, it can prompt you into action. But it is not good when you are so afraid that it keeps you from doing anything. He looked to his right, to the part of the maze where he had never been, and felt the fear. Then he took a deep breath, turned right into the maze, and jogged slowly into the unknown. As he tried to find his way, Haw worried at first that he might have waited too long in the cheese station sea. He hadn't had any cheese for so long that he was now weak. It took him longer and it was more painful than usual to get through the maze. He decided that if he ever got the chance again, he would get out of his comfort zone and adapt to the change sooner. It would make things easier. Then Haw smiled, a weak smile as he thought, better late than never. Guys, remember, better late than never. So whenever you are thinking of starting something new, and you're just brooding over your past, that your time has been passed, you don't have time for yourself, you have lost your time, yelling over again and again, so it's better late than never. Remember, it's good to start something at least. If you haven't tried, how could you say that yes, I tried what I wanted to do? Even if you fail, what matters? Who cares if you fail? This is your life, guys. So just do whatever you want. Just don't fear. Remember this first thought. What would you do if you weren't afraid? And better late than never. During the next several days, Haw found a little cheese here and there, but nothing has lasted very long. He had hoped to find enough cheese to take some back to Hem and encourage him to come out into the maze. But Haw didn't feel confident enough yet. He had to admit he found it confusing in the maze. Things seemed to have changed since the last time he was out here. Just when he thought he was getting ahead, he would get lost in the corridors. It seemed his progress was 2 steps forward and 1 step backward. It was a challenge, but he had to admit that being back in the maze, hunting for cheese, wasn't nearly as bad as he feared it might be. Let me share you guys about I'm reading out the story and I connect it with myself. Like whenever I take a 2 step forward for my progress, I still see myself at 1 step backward. So it's also a challenging journey for me. And that's why reading this story again and again is helping me to set my mindset towards progress, towards a productivity, rather than like just sitting and yelling over myself that I'm just losing my time, etc., etc. It's okay, so let's just get into this. As time went on, he began to wonder if it was realistic for him to expect to find new cheese. He wondered if he had bitten off more than he could chew. Then he laughed, realized that he had nothing to chew on at that moment. Whenever he started to get discouraged, he reminded himself that what he was doing, as uncomfortable as it was at the moment, was in reality much better than staying in the cheeseless situation. He was taking control rather than simply letting things happen to him. Then he reminded himself, if Sniff and Scurry could move on, so could he. So remember, whoever is your motivation, just look at them and motivate yourself. If they can do it, so can I. Later, as Hall looked back on things, he realized that cheese at the cheese station C had not just disappeared overnight, as he had once believed. The amount of cheese had been there toward the end had been getting smaller, and what was left had grown old. It didn't taste as good. Mold may even have begun to grow on the old cheese, although he hadn't noticed it. He had to admit, however, that if he had wanted to, he probably could have seen what was coming, but he didn't. Haw now realized that the change probably would not have taken him by surprise if he had been watching what was happening all along, and if he had anticipated change. Maybe that's what Sniff and Scurry had been doing. He decided he would stay more alert from now on. He would expect change to happen and look for it. He would trust his basic instincts to sense when change was going to occur and be ready to adapt to it. He stopped for a rest and wrote on the wall of the maze, "Smell the cheese often so you know when it is getting old. Smell the cheese often so you know when it is getting old." This is also relating to our own situation. If you can understand it, we just fail to happen. We just fail to look at the things, how they are going, how they're moving fast, how they're changing. And when something worse happen to us, we start yelling at our own situation or start crying over it. But since we didn't look at our surrounding, how the things were changing and how the things were going to be in the future, we didn't realize, we didn't know what is going to happen. And that's why we face those circumstances. So it's advisable to keep our mind, eyes, nose, ears, everything open and just keep looking at what the things are going on our surrounding and accept them as soon as we can. Sometimes later, after not finding cheese for what seemed like a long time, Haw finally came across a huge cheese station, which looked promising. When he went inside, however, he was most disappointed to discover that the cheese station was empty. This empty feeling has happened to me too often. He felt like giving up. Haw was losing his physical strength. He knew he was lost and was afraid he would not survive. He thought about turning around and heading back to cheese station C. At least, if he made it back and Hem was still there, Haw wouldn't be alone. Then he asked himself the same question again. What would I do if I weren't afraid? He thought he was past his fear, but he was afraid more often than he liked to admit. Even to himself, he wasn't always sure what he was afraid of. But in his weakened condition, he knew now he was simply fearful of ongoing alone. He didn't know it, but he was running behind because he was still weighed down by fearful beliefs. He wondered if Hem had moved on, or if he was still paralyzed by his own fears. Then he remembered the times when he had felt his best in the maze. It was when he was moving along. He wrote on the wall, knowing it was as much a reminder to himself as it was a marking for his friend Hem. Movement in a new direction helps you find new cheese. Movement in a new direction helps you find cheese. So what did you get through this line? Let me know in the comments below. Have a good day.